So I'm trying to get my first mobile app into the Apple App Store, US Healthcare Navigator, which I got ready like in December, and I thought, well, I'll get it published pretty soon, but it's been quite the ordeal, and Apple is so nitpicky, and they find like one or two things at once, and then you make changes, and then they want some more changes, and the UI is like so bad. But anyway, so now we are well into January, and I'm like really paranoid about getting it rejected even more. And in parallel, I've been working on another app because, just every time I submit it, there's some waiting. So I've been working on my executive AI primer, which is similar to your healthcare navigator in that it, gives users advice and it walks them through topics. And this one is obviously for executives and less technical managers, to explain all the ins and outs of AI to them, including technical details, so they can talk better with their technical teams. So that has been fun. But I got a little bit worried the other day, like what if I submit that second app and it's like too close to the first app, and I see that Apple has some spam filters, and I thought it was like really, those are completely different apps. They just share a lot of code, and like a lot of developers, like I don't write like this perfect artisanal code base that I use for one thing only. I always write reusable code that I then can use for additional products or features. So this is the case here. But what I wanted to make a video about is that I was discussing this with ChatGPT, and I always find it so fascinating when an LLM screws up in an interesting way. And LLMs have gotten like really good, like for the most part, if you give them tasks that they can tackle reasonably, they are quite good. And even you have to always deal with hallucinations, but in this time or this case, ChatGPT I think dropped the ball entirely. And we'll see. Maybe my executive AI primer will get rejected when I submit it. But I have a feeling that it won't, and that ChatGPT here just overread Apple's guidelines in a very, very nitpicky way that is not reasonable. And that reminded me a little bit of, there were reports that Claude tried to report somebody to the FBI because it felt there was fraud at a vending machine that it was running in the amount of $2. So I think LLMs, when you give them rules, that they are still really, really bad at making like human-like judgment calls. When there's a judgment call that's needed, where it's just not quite black and white, they tackle these things in a black and white way. And in some ways it makes sense when you think about it. Like if I give ChatGPT an image or Nano Banana or whatever, and say, remove all the ice from the sidewalk, it has to remove every little bit of ice. But if I gave it like a HOA rule, where maybe homeowners are required to remove ice from the sidewalk within a day, and it looks at pictures, would it be as strict? Possibly. So anyway, LLMs can be really, really nitpicky, and if they find like 5 centimeters worth of ice on the sidewalk, that they might, send the homeowner like a, $200 fine, or they might report somebody to the FBI over $2. And in this case, they said that my apps are spammy, and you can't have the same app mechanics in 2 apps, which is, again, it's a little bit crazy. If you have a code base, onboarding and structure of a home screen and buttons might look similar, but if you have completely different content, that's 2 different apps. But anyway, I was a little bit worried about it, about maybe releasing multiple apps, especially given that I been going through some rejections already. So I wanted to discuss it out with ChatGPT just to see, okay, like 2 apps is clearly not spam. If I would like to submit 5 apps in a month, would that be spam? And it said that, yeah, like based on Apple's rules, ChatGPT's blunt recommendation is, launch 1 app first, make each guide clearly differentiated, and that so far was good advice. But to note, I did put into my system prompt that I want ChatGPT to always give me pushback, not to be sycophantic, but to not to go with what I say, but always to be critical of me and give me good advice. So maybe that pushed it into the direction where here it went like, okay, Johanna is spamming here. I need to push a lot back, combined with the Apple guidelines, which you can interpret in one way or another. Anyway, I do find this is fascinating. I want to, already recorded it and talked way too long. Let's keep that a bit concise. But basically, first, ChatGPT suggests to make it all, make all these different apps one single app. US Healthcare Navigator, Executive AI Primer, and an upcoming Used Car Purchasing Guide and Frugal Living Guide, to make all these one single app. Synoptic Foundry guides with just different modules inside, just because they have same mechanics and share part of their code base, just with different topics, assets, text, etc. So that was ChatGPT's judgment call. A little bit crazy. It did recommend also to give it, if I want to make it separate apps, give it different features, and differentiate them that way, and have the branding per app, or to just have one navigator app, healthcare, used cars, frugal living, etc. Just one single app. Again, crazy. And I'm not deep into the Apple ecosystem, so only once I later on did some research, I found how crazy this really is, given that a lot of people write apps that share similar mechanics. But so it insists on, this would be one app in the App Store, and that gets it through the review process. Navigator is a collection of expert-built guides for life's most complex decisions. Yeah, well, people who are more into marketing are probably screaming, but I actually was I've been already a little bit traumatized because I had so much momentum in December and was hoping so much to get this app out, and then at a time when it was time sensitive, because December is the big month for people making healthcare decisions, so it would have been nice to get it out then. And so I got a bit depressed with ChatGPT's advice here, thinking, okay, if that's what it says, it probably has a lot of internet discussions to go on. Probably a lot of people are getting their apps rejected. And it even gave me examples. It said a city guide with different apps for different cities, which now that sounds spammy, 100 apps for 100 cities, or a Bible guide for different age target audiences, which later it couldn't even give me a quote or a source for that. But it gave me more examples of where people got rejected for being templated or having templated apps. And it said, okay, developers learn Python, learn Java, learn C++, learn JavaScript, same layout, same lesson flow. And I was like, oh my God, that's so much like my idea, or my, planned family of apps. Even though different languages is still a little bit closer than what I'm doing. topic-wise. But yeah, if those get rejected, yeah, I'm like in the dangerous territory. Same with lawyer's reference, doctor's reference, real estate agent toolkit. And that's when I started to think, okay, yeah, this doesn't make sense. Like, why? I mean, would Apple really insist on baking all these into one single app just because it has similar in-app mechanics and navigation? Yeah, so I pushed back. And yeah, it did insist that the core interaction has to be fundamentally different, like a budgeting app versus a meditation app. Your disagreement is valid, but risky in practice. You risk, getting banned as from the developer program, etc. And so let's see here. I'm trying to go through this a little faster this time, even though I do think every step is fascinating because if you remember, it started out with saying it's risky, it could get rejected, and then it starts digging in and saying, yeah, no, this is like if you have the same mechanics, same kind of navigation, same onboarding, that'll throw up huge flags and you'll get rejected and banned and it's spammy. So so then I gave some suggestions of maybe adding more features that are specific to each app. And it did like that, but that seems like and I'll still probably do it because these different topics lend themselves to different features. And I can add that, but it did at that point depress me a little bit when I thought, okay, my first release into the App Store might be taking a while, but at least then I have something that works, I have everything figured out, and I can release at least 1 or 2 more apps this month. And now it's like, crushing my hopes with that. So at that point I was like really discouraged. So this helps answer the question if I should continue to focus on my family of Expo apps or move on to something new. And that's admittedly like my fault. I get discouraged quickly. Like I get these ideas for something that could be a viable business, and then if it doesn't take off immediately, if I run into any kind of difficulties like this, then sometimes there's this new shiny project where it's where I maybe then get, okay, should I be working on something completely different rather than here being seen as some fresh new spammy app developer. And I also want to be proud of my work, and here ChatGPT is pretty cruel, as I demanded in the system prompt about that what I'm doing is kind of spammy. So we're talking a little bit about this, but then I started like second guessing and thinking like, okay, it really hasn't given me any like real examples with links. And I also had some suggestions like spacing out the release, which could mitigate a little bit the risk of being spam, but then again the risk is still very high here according to ChatGPT if the apps are structurally identical. So anyway, but so then I finally did some research, searched the App Store, and found like the very first developer app that I looked up that was a little bit similar to the executive AI primer, like AI teaching app. Like I found like this app developer had obviously a lot of similar apps with the very same pattern, released as different apps because it's different tests to study for. And very interestingly, ChatGPT says this is the exact example everyone eventually finds when they start worrying about template apps on the App Store, which is, at that point, I got the idea that this was like a lot of hallucinating. It was a ChatGPT digging in, because it's just impossible that the first example that I pulled up is something that everyone runs into who researches this. This did not make sense at all. And so I pushed back and like asked for more examples, because here it said, okay, this is like if it's like about credentials, then Apple makes like a distinction for that. So now it tries to dig in and like give, now it really starts hallucinating of why the early advice was still correct, and the example I found was just like this one-off different thing, because it's about exams and credentials. So so I do feel at this point I'm like pushing back. So there's no reasonable app that could cater to both company executives learning AI and out of a job people living frugally, and an app learning about how the US healthcare system works. And it says that's fair. You're arguing from user reality, but Apple evaluates from product architecture. So like now it really digs in that Apple looks at the binary, it looks at the app code, and if the mechanics are the same, it's the same app from Apple's point of view. So now it gets like really weird, where it says, okay, if the primary user actions are the same of browsing content, following guided flows, reading explanations, at that point you have the same app and it needs to be the same app. Which is so crazy. And the objections I raise, it says, okay, this is like different. So, but historically it says Apple flagged things like learn Python, learn Java, learn C++. Those can't be different apps. Lawyer reference, doctor reference, HR reference can't be different apps. So these have different audiences, different subject matter, and yet they still get hit when the interaction model is the same. And now we're really in crazy land, where it just makes up a lot of stuff. And again, we find out, maybe I submit my AI, executive guide, and, I get dinged, but like I think most marketing people and app developers will look at this and say, it seems like ChatGPT is way overstepping in its interpretation of Apple's rules at this point. So now I press it for examples. And this is like where I was like really surprised, because it was searching for examples. I asked it to search for real life examples earlier, and it gave me examples without quoting sources. And I guess that's a typical thing where, unless you go to the source and you verify what it says, it could still be just something made up. And that was the case here. It could not give me an example of where a Learn Python app by the same developer was rejected because they already had a Learn Java app. And I actually went in there then into the App Store and really searched for more app examples. And Apple gives the example of that you shouldn't have like one app for, or like that you shouldn't have 100 separate apps for like 100 separate sports teams, or for city guides, that you shouldn't make a separate app for every single city, which is clearly spammy. If you release 100 apps just to cover 100 city guides, that's not what I'm doing. So it grants me that my critique is valid, but it still kind of digs in. And then I actually gave it some examples. And like the first few apps that I looked up for like learning Java or learning Python, I found a lot of small app developers who released families of apps, no problem, clearly, even very recently, even something obviously spammy like different wallpaper apps just with different motives, like a Jeep wallpaper app, and the same developer released a birds wallpaper app. And so crazy how ChatGPT couldn't come up with examples from internet discussions that apps got rejected, but I could come up with a lot of examples where even like sort of spammy apps made it through that were clearly templated. And so then it very reluctantly goes and it grants I no longer think Apple will likely force you to consolidate these. I think your plan is reasonable and your odds are good. So that feels really good when you were able to argue with ChatGPT and it dug in, and then finally you convince it that it was wrong. And so LLMs, of course, when you program, they're often wrong with code stuff, which is, they don't have the most recent training data, and coding frameworks change a lot. So that's very expected to be wrong in that aspect. But here I found very fascinating that, it was really the judgment call. And, I'm going to wrap it up here. Very interesting example, in my opinion, and maybe because I'm just not familiar with the Apple mobile app submission process, I went like for way too long with what ChatGPT was saying, and I was believing what it was saying because it just comes across as so smart. And I figured it had like, a ton of training data of what gets through the store and what gets rejected. So a reminder to always like second guess what these LLMs are doing and saying, and also maybe just a cautionary tale over how nitpicky and bureaucratic they can be about rules. Just like that that they would report a user to the FBI over $2 when they see what they think is like a financial crime. Or it makes me a little bit wary of a future where AI maybe gets to make more and more decisions based on rules, and we'll have less and less humans in the loop that help mitigate these sort of things. But I've rambled long enough, so I'm going to wrap it up here. And thank you so much for watching to the end. And I'll make a follow-up video, possibly about submitting my other apps. So all right, bye.